Hey everyone, this is Zero X Wing from RUNEBase.org, and we are back after a bit of a hiatus there for another episode of the RUNEBase podcast. Now, for any of you that have been following along in the news closely or even not so closely, you've probably heard that July was a pretty crazy time for the THORChain ecosystem. THORChain suffered a series of exploits through July that really kind of took the community by surprise, shook it up a little bit. It was a pretty wild time and a lot of news, a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of fear around what was going on. During that time, we were really busy. We were churning out news and updates. And so the podcast kind of got put on a back seat. But we knew we wanted to do something to cover this and to do it the justice that it deserves. Because this is historic. I think we fully expect THORChain is going to become a critical piece of crypto infrastructure and a piece of history. And we had to cover this. And we wanted to do it right. So I reached out to two people I knew who really know their shit and knew this inside and out. And that is Chris from GrassRoots Crypto. GrassRootsCrypto.io is the OG when it comes to education in the THORChain ecosystem. You can check out Chris's videos on YouTube. Just search for GrassRoots Crypto. And he's done so much for educating and informing the community about all things THORChain and THORChain ecosystem. He's got two great videos out on the topic of the exploits. And so he joined. And also my collaborator and partner in RuneBase, Tratium. Tratium, before doing RuneBase and currently still, he runs THORChain.help, which is a community-driven documentation portal educating on THORChain and the Rune token. And he also was responsible for the design and development of the THORChain.com website, which is a website that explains THORChain in very simple terms. So you can check out his work there. And on this podcast, Chris and Tratium and I got together and we discussed the sequence of events over the last 3 weeks. And what we're going to do in the next episode is the three of us are going to get back together and we will be talking about the way that this strengthened the community, the response from the core development team and from the community as well, and how THORChain is coming out of this and working towards a brighter future, which it 100,000% is. And we're all extremely optimistic about what's going on here. That's everything. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you on the inside of the episode. Peace. Tratium, Chris, thank you guys both so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Pleasure to have you guys. So yeah, I guess the best place to start, before we jump into the recap of recent events around THORChain, part of the purpose of this podcast is for us to get to know the community and the people that are in the THORChain ecosystem. And so I'd love to start by, getting to know each of you and just getting a bit of background on each of you. So Chris, I'd love to start with you. Would love for you, if you want to give some background, and we all know GrassRoots Crypto, obviously you're the OG of education in the THORChain ecosystem, but what's your story? How'd you get into crypto and how'd you get involved with THORChain?
Sure. So I got into crypto, had some friend over for dinner, and then we're just talking, and he was explaining about crypto, and I'd heard about Bitcoin in 2014 when it was like fluctuating $200 a day. So I wasn't that interested. He's like, crypto. And it's quite convincing. He was talking about Celsius Network, how you can get like 10% return on stables, like 10% APY. I'm like, that's pretty good. So I decided to go to a meetup, and I guess that's where my story of crypto started. Because I could see, having an IT background, I could see that blockchain was the future. I was very much a blockchainer, not Bitcoin type person at the start. Huh. Then, I did courses on it and everything, and then kind of realized that it's very difficult. It's not the silver bullet. There's many other good solutions out there to solve technological problems, and blockchain is just not like the only thing, as everyone was kind of flaunting it to be. So anyway, I wanted to get in this space. I didn't know how. Through meetup, through the grapevine, I'd heard about THORChain. My friend had got into the IDO. I didn't. But then I'd heard about the Rune Vault getting, 51%? And I'm like, even if the price stays the same, that's pretty good. So I kind of aped into that a bit because I heard it was all right. And for me, it was, you could unlock Bitcoin. You could put Bitcoin into like liquidity pools, unlock Bitcoin and get return on Bitcoin. So that was me. I'm like, that's amazing. Didn't really care about anything else. That there was sounds pretty good. Then BepSwap was going to launch. They wanted to do some interface testing, find bugs. I'd been good at finding bugs. So I decided to give that a crack, and I was able to break it pretty good. I tried to get in there early because if you found defects, they had a bounty on. So I guess it just progressed from there. Then they wanted to run nodes, like have node operators for testnet 4, I think I got in for. And I was like, I don't really know this type of stuff. I didn't know about all the technological stack. I'd used Docker a bit before, but thought I'd just give it a crack. So after a couple of days of wrestling with it, I got it working. And then whilst I was on holiday, Kai put out, I think, a request for someone to do a video on nodes, like how to set up a node, how to update a node. And like no one responded for 2 weeks. And I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks. So I decided to just give it a crack. And I kind of just went from there.
And that was the genesis of GrassRoots, if you will.
Well, yeah, I made the node series. Other people wanted other videos, and kind of annoyed me a little bit as well was you go watch all the other YouTube videos and stuff like that, and they'll be using like liquidity pool. Like, well, what is a liquidity pool? People don't use those two words. People don't use the word liquidity at all in normal talking. So like, it's just such a foreign concept. So I made that video on, what's a liquidity pool, so people understand what that means. And then, it got onto impermanent loss, which was such a hard video to make.
Yes, it is. A hard concept to explain.
I took it without making it overly complex and using all the maths, but just to explain what these terms mean, to bring it back for the average person off the street that doesn't understand any of this stuff. So that's really was the driving force for GrassRoots Crypto, and what I felt was missing when you go watch all the other YouTube videos that I'm a fan of. To say that they just go into, we're talking about ETH, we're talking about BTC, we're talking about DeFi and liquidity pools and yield farming, and it's like, what is that? You go talk to your noob friends that come around that don't know any of this, they just have no clue. So where's that bridge, that gap for people? And I guess I kind of diverted down the whole THORChain because I found that interesting and have continued down that path for a while.
I can relate. Yeah, I can relate entirely. That was the basis for RuneBase as well. And GrassRoots, the work that you've been doing there, the explainer videos, the visual aids that you come up with, and the way that you explain things, the depth that you go into, it's inspiration for some of the videos and guides that I've been putting out as well. And a lot of what I've learned about THORChain, I've learned through your instruction. So you're doing a great job.
Thanks.
And is GrassRoots now, how much do you focus on it? Are you full-time in crypto now, or are you still like doing, you still have a day job outside of crypto and just moonlighting in crypto? What's your involvement like?
Well, I went full-time at the start of the year. So just because full-time in crypto, and it's more of a, whilst I do take it seriously, it's something that's more of a passion type project, because I wanted to get into the space. And whilst I've done coding, I'm probably not the best coder. It'll take me a while to get going. I just didn't know where to get into it. And it's kind of like, I just fell into this and I enjoy doing it. So I was like, I could either continue working or just put my attention on something I enjoy. So I decided to, go full time, and don't say do it full time, but that's my focus, is making videos, understanding the space, increasing my education, because obviously I can't teach something that I don't understand properly. Yeah. Just building my knowledge, because I think this area is going to have a big future.
It really is. And I can relate to that as well. I think earlier this year, I was able to make the transition out of my other software businesses into a full-time focus in crypto and in the THORChain ecosystem more specifically. And it's great to have this near complete alignment between the work that I'm doing and what I feel deeply just honestly like is a joy to be working on. Like, it's truly intellectually engaging and fun. And I feel like the luckiest guy alive. I will admit to like having a bit of like when these exploits, which we'll talk about over the last month, when they happened, it was just kind of a downer because so much of my world and my community was like surrounded by it. But we're coming out stronger for it. And it's again, just a really fun thing to be working on day in, day out. So can 100% relate. So yeah, Chris, thank you for that background. It's great to hear your story. And I'm looking forward to collaborating with you more, on content education. I think we're building alongside each other. And so we have a lot of good work we can do together.
Sweet. Cool.
Yeah. And now with Tratium, I think Tratium, those of you that might recognize the name, he's on Twitter as @Tratium, Tratium, and he is my collaborator on RuneBase. He basically runs the editorial section and writes a lot of news and edits a lot of news from other writers. So Tratium, thank you for joining us. Yeah, we'd love to hear your background too. What's your background? How'd you get into crypto and how'd you come across THORChain?
Yeah, well, I've first started mining Bitcoin in college back in 2010, I believe. We started when Bitcoin was around $1 only. But as poor, starving college kids, running out to Micro Center, building mining rigs, buying up all the GPUs and building computers, without even chassis, just connecting motherboards and RAM and power supplies directly, into the wall sockets in our dorm rooms, to save money. Thank you, George Mason, for paying for my electricity running our Bitcoin mining rigs. They paid for themselves after the first month. But again, as poor college kids, every time we, mined a block and got our payout, we would dump it immediately to pay for Chipotle and, housing expenses and tuition. So, I'm still working, full time in software development, Silicon Valley type company, because I'd never really had an opportunity to keep my mined Bitcoins. But yeah, so off and on, interested in crypto since that time. I've always been extremely passionate about the technology, and from an investor standpoint, I held little bits kind of going up and down in the markets, during the 2010, 2011 cycle, 2013, of course, in 2017, that was, starry eyes thinking I'm going to retire soon. And then, 2018, everything crashes down. But from when I learned about Bitcoin to when I learned about Ethereum, there was nothing really in between those things that excited me. Bitcoin was extremely cool when it came out, and obviously it's the king. It laid the foundation, and then Ethereum, with smart contracts and infinite possibilities of what it can do, was the next thing to be mind blowing. But then even through that whole 2017 ICO cycle, nothing existed that really seemed like it was going to be a game changer. There's a lot of these, vaporware promises and stuff that, all the white papers and stuff that seemed like they could be cool, but there was nothing really there that seemed that interesting. And then, 2020, DeFi summer last year, I started doing my typical, deep dives on everything I can get my hands on, just researching all the projects, that are coming out, Aave, Sushi, Uni, and I ran across THORChain, and I'm like, this is different. This is not just your average project. And like I said, I've been in crypto since 2010. And in the past 10 years, there's never been a way to just swap between blockchains. I remember when Ether Delta came out, and that was the first, decentralized exchange. And that was very cool. But there were, even when getting back into the game and doing this, deep dive in altcoins and stuff in 2017, if you wanted to buy something that wasn't, available on Uniswap, you still had to go to Bittrex or Binance or Coinbase or whatever and go through a centralized exchange and swap it. And so when I saw THORChain, I was like, this is finally, I can't believe it's taken this long. There's been all these false starts with atomic swaps and these other half-baked projects that never really took off. And THORChain was actually solving it in a decentralized and anonymous way, which was huge. And immediately, nothing else mattered. CoinMarketCap, you could have gotten rid of every single token except for Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Rune. And that really seems to me to be what are the most important projects in crypto. Of course, you have all these DeFi projects and lending insurance protocols and such built on Ethereum that would be very important. Stuff like Luna is very cool, Haven. But really, when it comes down to it, there's a handful of things that are needed in the kind of decentralized finance world, and almost all of those can be accomplished with just THORChain. Synthetics, lending, auto paying loans, exchanges, all this kind of stuff. It really does kind of take over the need for almost every other crypto in a lot of ways. Obviously, a lot of other things aren't necessary, but THORChain just accomplishes so much that it was just an instant draw for me. And then even more so when I joined the Telegram and saw how active the community was. when I wanted to contribute, I kept seeing the same questions over and over and over and over and over again in Telegram, people asking the same basic questions like, what is the difference between liquidity providing and staking? What is the difference between this and REN or Uniswap? And I got tired of answering the same questions over and over again. So I created THORChain.help, which was really inspired by the Yearn, what was it called? How to Yearn or Learn to Yearn by Blue Kirby. And he had this very simple, Git book website that just had the basic frequently asked questions about Yearn, the bull case, and the various kind of frequently asked questions. So I created, kind of a copy of that idea for THORChain. And ever since then, every time someone in Telegram would ask the same basic question over again, I would create a new answer for it, and just link them to that post. And so it reduced the number of questions that were being asked. It helped people understand some of the basic concepts. And in a very similar way to Chris and Grassroots, I just saw this need for explain like I'm five in the THORChain world. Because that didn't really exist. And the only documentation about THORChain that existed were the developer docs, which, were written in latex with formulas and stuff. Like the average moon boy does not know how to parse that. And then from there, I did a couple merge requests into AsgardX to help contribute. And then later on, I kept updating THORChain.help. And then there was this, big community, rivalry almost between Meow Brains and the THORChain.org website, and a large part of the community wanting something simpler and kind of a little bit less intense. And so I saw that massive kind of community kind of getting riled up, and so I took a couple of days to kind of spin up a prototype version of THORChain.com that was just much simplified, easier to read. And the community loved it. Half the community loved the .org, half the community loved the .com, but the fighting stopped, which was great. That was my goal, just to stop the arguing between the two different halves of the community. So from there, I've been updating that and, linking out to different learning sources like THORChain.help or GrassRootsCrypto or RUNEBase. And then, a month or two or three ago, first started seeing the retweets from the THORChain Twitter account for RUNEBase, and was looking at, what you guys were accomplishing. And I was like, hey, this is exactly the same type of thing I'm trying to accomplish. Just these easy to, understand tutorials and explanations for the THORChain community. And then I saw the application for, being a contributor. And I noticed that one of the examples of here's what good writing looks like was one of the bull case for Rune article that I had written on THORChain.help. And I was like, hey, what? If my writing is a good example, then I think I'm a perfect fit here. Contacted you. And here we are.
Yeah. It just occurred to me, I was totally remiss not to mention it from the top, but Tratium also of THORChain.help and THORChain.com. We appreciate the work you've done there. And I think another just kind of funny irony here is I didn't actually see, it was kind of messy, the way that Google Forms organizes responses. So I didn't see a response until weeks after. I don't know if you remember the time.
It was a while, yeah.
Submitting that. And it wasn't because your application didn't nail it. It's just I literally in the Google Forms responses, it was shuffled in the middle and it got kind of lost in the spread. So really happy we connected, because having you on board on the news and editorial side is just it is such a perfect fit. You're in the community, you understand what's going on, and you're active, you're engaging, you're enthusiastic, and it's just it's been an absolute pleasure working with you. So really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and then, also can completely relate to what you're saying about your enthusiasm. Just going back to what you said about when you discovered THORChain, and it's Bitcoin, then Ethereum, then THORChain. This is something, it's the most acute pain point that I'm still feeling now with MCCN down. I'm getting some payments in BUSD or in BNB Rune for work we're doing on RuneBase, and I need that paid out in USDC or Ethereum or USDT. And getting from one to the other without going through, we don't want to go through a centralized exchange. It's we're killing ourselves trying to use the Binance bridge, and there's just no great option. So we're excited for MCC and to be back online, just like everybody else, I'm sure. So yeah, Tratium, thanks for that overview, and it's always great to hear the story. And so with that, let's jump into this recap of recent events. We'll talk, what the three of us were talking about here before the show is we'll do probably 45 minutes or so on the recap of recent events, going over 3 recent exploits and then a little bonus exploit, as we're calling it, that have transpired over the last 3.5, 4 weeks. And then we'll get back together for another episode tomorrow on the community and the team response and some of the really exciting and optimistic things that are happening, and the way in which the response is actually making this not a negative event, but actually like a very anti-fragile kind of strengthening of the community and the project as a whole. So to start with exploit 1, we had a Whitehat reporting of an exploit that was made possible due to the ERC777 router. Now, this is something I had kind of a front row seat with being involved in the THORstarter project. THORstarter had chosen to use an ERC777 standard as opposed to the standard ERC20 standard Ethereum token. And a Whitehat hacker was able to identify an exploit, a possible exploit. And luckily, they were, white hat, so they reported this, or they performed the exploit, reported it, and then refunded for a bounty, if I have that correct. Chris or Tratium, either of you want to take this on and give a recap of what transpired here?
Go, Tratium.
Sure. So I'm not a Solidity developer, so my explanation of this is going to be basically recapping what THORChain says in their Medium postmortem. But from what I understand, basically the ERC777 reentry bug was kind of a known bug. I think it had affected other DEXs, possibly Uniswap, but patched years ago. And when THORChain created their router, this exploit was overlooked. So I don't think this is a new exploit to the community. And I think some of the kind of more Solidity ERC20 veterans, from like Yearn and stuff, were not surprised to see this happen. But from what I understand, it was effectively a bug that took advantage of the fact that ERC777 contracts can have, or tokens allow hooks to be called when they're transacted on. So effectively what the hacker did was send ETH to the router, the THORChain router, with a hook that also called the same, like a similar type of transaction event to be called into the THORChain router. So when that happened, the THORChain router picked that up as 2 events happening, 2 transactions, effectively double dipping on the deposit. And then the second one didn't actually go through, and the balance, or that transaction amount, was then withdrawn back into the attacker's wallet. So it was basically like a double dipping bug that the attacker got credited more than what they could have actually deposited. Chris, does that sound about right?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So they get more than what they should get. Let's just have people that don't know difference between ERC20 and 777. It's just the 777 is a new standard, has a bit more functionality, but it's pretty much, I want to say, the same as ERC20. It's just, you can say, a newer, more complicated version that I think is back. Yeah, that's the only real difference. And
I think a couple people, just want to clear something up, that a few people on Twitter or Telegram thought that this exploit was due to a problem with THORstarter's XRune token. The fact that THORstarter used ERC777 there should be nothing negative about that. It's a new standard, like Chris said. They didn't do anything wrong. It was just the fact that XRune was the only token in THORChain liquidity pools that happened to be an ERC20 that allowed this exploit in particular to only affect XRune. It's just that all the rest of the tokens that existed within THORChain liquidity pools were, originally developed in a longer time ago, before 777 was the newer popular standard. So that's the reason why only XRune was affected. Nothing to do with THORstarter in particular, just bad luck.
Do you remember the sequence of events? If I remember correctly, did the attacker actually drain some X rune and then claimed the bounty? Is that correct? And then return funds, or did they just point out the exploit?
I'm trying to recall. I'm not actually sure if they collect that bounty and return funds. I believe the kind of official communications from THORChain was that instead of treating this as a black hat, like, oh, please hacker, return our funds, it was a small amount withdrawn, 130,000 or so. I guess it was Lena maybe on Discord or Telegram saying basically, hey, attacker, keep those funds. We'll treat that as a bounty. You're good to go. We won't, blacklist or anything. Blacklists aren't even really possible in THORChain anyway. But they're not going to seek any, repercussions or anything like that. Just, hey, keep it as a bounty. Thanks for pointing this out. Thanks for not taking more. So I think it was effectively treated as a bounty and labeled the kind of event more gray hat because it was not properly disclosed, but it was also not like a devastating bug that was done in a way that would cripple the network. So it was effectively like, let's just chalk this up as a gray hat hack and keep the money as a bounty.
Sure. Yeah. And I remember being in some chats with some of the team from THORstarter when this was brought to attention, and there was an alert that was put out, and it was like a potential hack has been identified. So I think you're right. I think it was caught earlier on, reported earlier on. And then trading was trading halted while that issue was resolved. And then eventually brought back online. And I think, my kind of feeling about all of this and the reason why these 3.5, 4 exploits happened in quick succession is because once one of these things happen, the black hats in crypto just, start circling like sharks and start to look for those like, oh, like there's potential. This is a target now. And so that's why you get this like quick sequence of events. And so that leads the stage for, this Whitehat reveals this ERC 777 exploit. Network is paused. The issue addressed, returned back online, and then quickly after that, exploit number 2 happens. And then this is the router wrapping exploit. And this is where there were ETH deposit transactions that causes ETH to go out of balance in the pool. And Chris, this is, I believe, where your video series you did. Correct me if I'm wrong. You did 2 videos on recent events, and I think it picks up from here. Do you want to give an overview of exploit 2, this router wrapping exploit?
Yeah, sure. So the attacker creates their own smart contract to sort of like wrap around the router. And people that haven't seen my video, the router sort of like connects between Ethereum and Bifrost, and then Bifrost to actually like internals of THORChain, even though Bifrost is an internal part. But anyway, so the router is a smart contract, and what someone did was call the router with their own smart contract to send Ethereum in, and just say they send go back a step. So the attacker sends funds to their own smart contract and just say they're sending 200 Ethereum. Then that sends that down to the router. But at the smart contract they made, they changed the deposit amount to say 0. So the router gets it and then goes off to Bifrost. And Bifrost is like, well, what amount of it? We've got a transaction for Ethereum. What amount got sent in? And it goes, look, it's the original transaction, which is 200, instead of saying 0 being put in. So it's just where the router and Bifrost is looking for that transaction amount, and it's looking at the source, the original transaction, instead of what the router received. So it's a way of tricking the network into seeing what it has been received. So you just know where it's looking, and then you can start to trick the network. And I think you're right. Like that's where with the first hack, it's like, oh, THORChain can be hacked because it's got TSS, it's BFT, and all that type of stuff. It can be hacked, so people start looking, and then if you manipulate with between the router and Bifrost with certain sequence of events, you can start to find exploits.
And this happens particularly it's in the ETH rune pool, right? Was there any other pools that were affected?
Yes, particularly around ETH, Ethereum, and like you said, that brought that out of balance. So if you know the XYK curve, like the graph, it just pushed Ethereum to like a really ridiculous amount. So you could potentially do this with I think you could do this with other ERC20s as well. Like it's not because you've got the router, because of the way that mechanism works, you can do that with anything on the Ethereum chain, which just makes it really it's really cool, because it doesn't matter whether you're saying Ethereum in ERC20 or whatever, you're just you're intercepting essentially the transaction. It's like a man-in-the-middle attack. You're intercepting the transaction, changing the amount, and then Bifrost is always going to look at the source, not what was changed in between.
Got it. And so this attacker was able to leverage this exploit to drain, if I remember correctly, it was between $7 and $8 million worth of ETH at the time. Is that correct? You guys remember? Yeah,
it was like bulk amount. So I think in the final postmortem it was like 8 million. And I saw like 9 million and stuff like that. Reports were like much higher, but they stopped some of the outbound transactions for Ethereum, like the hacker Ethereum transactions, because they managed to halt the network in time, so they were pending. So that mitigated the actual the losses that were going to happen.
Yeah, this started a very blurry sequence of events for the whole ecosystem, and myself included. But I do remember some of that early, this attack early on. There was a number, was it 23,000 ETH or something that was being thrown around a lot?
I think the original report was about 23 million stolen, because I think the original calculations used the total number of attempts to withdraw with that 200 ETH balance in the attacker's address. And they attempted that, I guess, like 14 or however many times it was, which, completely totaled to being something like 13,000 ETH, I think, about 26,000 at the time. But, sorry, 26 million
US dollars.
A couple extra zeros there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we even reported on that early on because we saw that in the THORChain announcements Telegram channel. And I feel bad about, well, I don't say feel bad, but I think that headline is a big one, right? And that just led to some increasing confusion around this. And there was, I think, a big sigh of relief from all of us when it came later that, the network was halted. A lot of those outbound ETH transactions didn't go through, and it ended up being 4,000.
It's certainly a lot better to make your initial assumption a lot higher than the corrected amount lower than the other way around. I think that looks a little bit better. And honestly, that big sigh of relief was kind of felt around Twitter. So I think that was the better way of going about it than reporting it, under-reporting, and then having to correct it to a much higher amount.
Absolutely. And so we can talk about what happened in the time after this particular exploit. The way that the way that THORChain was halted, the way in which there was a kind of a bit of a gaffe or a blunder, if you will, in restarting the network before the ETH pools rebalanced. But before we get to that, Tratium, was there anything you would add about this particular exploit, like how it went down and what transpired?
No, I think Chris about summed it up. I don't think anything to add there. Got
it. And so this happens, and then if I remember correctly, this gets brought up is this the one? I get my timeline of events here confused because this was all in such rapid succession and it was a very kind of messy time all around. But, was this brought up? Was this where the architect was bringing this up in the Discord? Or was that exploit?
Yes, that was also this one, I believe. So this one, right after the trading was halted, I believe it, again, timeline not exact, but like a day or whatever afterwards, a couple days, the patch was put in place. Nodes were updating to 0.62, maybe 1, which included a store migration so that the nodes knew the accurate amount of ETH remaining in the system. THORChain thought it had 13,000 ETH, but it actually had 700. And so this store migration included an update to manually correct that balance that was in the pools. Unfortunately, this big kind of blunder was done because 100% of nodes need to update for I believe, like I said, like a .1 update that includes this kind of these things that affect all nodes. And since the chain was restarted before all the nodes had accepted this update and had updated, I think there was like 2 nodes only, out of whatever, how 36 it is, like 2 nodes hadn't updated, but the chain was restarted. And so that store migration that had that corrected ETH amount was not actually applied. So trading went live. There was way more ETH thought to be in the system than actually existed. So that Rune ETH balance was basically opposite of what it should have been. So instead of arbors adding, well, I guess, what would they want to do? Instead of arbors selling ETH to correct it down to the correct price, they started buying cheap ETH. So it threw the system even further out of balance. And that remaining, I guess, roughly 700 ETH was then also kind of arbed away. It wasn't hacked away. It wasn't exploited. Just this out of whack balance was taken advantage of by honest, valid arbitrage opportunities, not stealing ETH out of the system for cheap, for way less than market value.
Go ahead, Chris.
Just to say, this comes because in a liquidity pool, you have 2 assets. You have obviously Rune, and then in this case, you have Ethereum. So that's based off the depth. So the depth is how many Ethereum it has. So the ratio between those 2 determines the price of the pool, or the price of each asset more specifically. So then when, Ethereum's going at $300 odd, that's the pool price. So it doesn't care what the market price is. So then as you said, that, they're saying cheap Ethereum. So of course they're going to go buy Ethereum and then sell it on market for a profit. So that's why the price needs to be set correctly. And that's where that solvency check was supposed to come in for the Asgard Vault, where it checks to ensure that what it believes it has, that's recorded in the replicated state machine, is what's actually in the vault, or what THORChain actually has. And if there's a difference in that, it's going to affect the pool price. And that's what happened here.
And this was all, you mentioned solvency check. And so this is one of the things, and we'll talk about this in the next episode, but deploying this solvency checker was like one of the first things that like the community's like, all right, like, or the core dev team's like, this needs to go out. Like this should be a part of the system. Something, we touched on 2 things here. I think there were heated conversations in the community in the wake of this arbitrage. So there's two different things happened here. One is there was the exploit, which was the router wrapping exploit that caused the ETH to go out of balance in the pool. And then the system being turned back on prematurely before the ETH pool could be rebalanced and the prices and the system reflecting normalcy. And that created this opportunity, as we've discussed, where these arbitrageurs really doing their job, in a sense, not doing anything really malicious, but just getting ridiculously cheap ETH. And that throwing THORChain's treasury even into even greater liability here, because the treasury insures basically these liquidity pools and all liquidity providers. So this brought up now the network was again halted by the nodes, and not all of these transactions, these ARB transactions went through, and this created this not entirely unlike the DAO hack kind of philosophical debate as to what path the community should take in terms of refunding these letting these arbitrage transactions go through versus kind of like revising history and refunding the ARBs, the arbitrageurs. Tratium, is there anything about that situation? Could you add a little bit more color to like what the debate was around there and what the 2 sides were each kind of championing?
Yeah, absolutely. So the real question was, so not all transactions went through. So when the chain was halted, there were still pending, valid ARB transactions that were stopped, dead in their tracks in the outbound queue. So that question was like, do we turn the chain back on and without purging this queue, but with a halted network, so that what's pending still gets to go out, but new ARB withdrawals can no longer be processed? Or do we purge the queue and stop these arbors from enjoying more cheap ETH? And so, there was a big kind of debate in the community. Although thinking back on it, I think the two sides of the debate were everybody versus people with pending ARB transactions for cheap ETH.
Yeah.
Right? Like everyone who had a ARB transaction for $300 ETH, of course, wanted it to go through. Like, that's free money. That's great. I mean, if I was, faster than I was, maybe I would have tried that as well and been like, hey, maybe we should not purge the queue. So I, maybe there were a couple people with more, moral discussions on it. And I think there were. There is that question of how should the network care, and how should the developers care, and what control should the developers have? It's supposed to be this kind of agnostic, transparent network that doesn't ask questions, doesn't stop anyone from doing anything. Code is law, all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, if the treasury is bled dry, then no one gets to use THORChain liquidity. The treasury gets sent to zero, and no one gets to have cross-chain swaps. So protecting the network while it's in this chaos net stage is, in my opinion, the way to go. And plenty of our transactions went through. Plenty of users got very cheap ETH. So kind of adding gas to the fire and allowing even more ARB transactions to go through just to let people be happy was kind of a questionable kind of argument to make. Mm-hmm. But there are kind of deeper discussions around things like Mir, the kind of admin API that exists that can halt the chain. And there is, discussions on whether that should exist or not. And of course, that's planned to be phased out after mainnet. And that control will be going away from the core developers and into the hands of node operators. But we're in ChaosNet right now. If Mir didn't exist, there would be no way to change the number of nodes that churn in, no way to easily halt the network, no way to easily raise the caps without constant node updates. So it's as Eric Voorhees said, there is no immaculate conception of a fully decentralized anonymous network. That doesn't happen. That didn't happen for Bitcoin, didn't happen for Ethereum, didn't happen for anything. At some point, there is a single developer writing code, running mining on his own computer before he can get other people interested in it, before he can get people invested in that ecosystem, into running their Bitcoin clients and running their THORChain nodes. And yes, we're in ChaosNet. So those philosophical discussions will be happening again, obviously. Yep. And the long-term plan is to take complete control away from the developers and put into the hands of the community and the node operators. And that is the entire point of THORChain, is just have this autonomous network that runs on its own without a singular point of failure. It can evade capture by central authorities. And so, but it's really a cool kind of fire drill for those types of discussions and these kinds of events and how to respond to them. And pretty much all of three of these hacks, the network was halted. In some cases, it was halted by an admin. I think the second time it was halted after that ARB, the post exploit one ARB opportunity, it was I think manually halted. But I remember watching in Discord and for the other events, seeing on the THORnode announcement channel, the devs saying, "Hey, operators, halt your nodes right now. We need to shut down the network." And operators responding very quickly with, "Oh, hey, nodes, mine's going down. You could watch live on THORChain.net or THORChain.network and see nodes going offline. And once a certain percentage of them go offline, the network stops. And that's really amazing to see, that the idea of the nodes kind of really being the keys to the network. They did their job, and it was really a great demonstration of decentralization.
Yeah, that centralization versus decentralization argument that started to come up was another one that just floated around crypto Twitter a little bit, particularly like with THORChain detractors saying, hey, how does a decentralized network, halt itself? And I think you gave a great recap there. So thank you. Now, network goes offline. The nodes make halt, and then exploit number 3 comes back around. So what was the timeline between, Chris, do you remember the timeline of events between the, I think the network was still halted. I think when exploit number 3 occurred and ERC20s were drained from, including like XRune and a bunch of other ERC20s. Is that right? Like the chain was still running, but the network was halted, I believe. What was that? What exactly happened there?
So I'll let Chris explain the hack itself, because he probably has a better technical explanation than I do. But yeah, I was watching in Discord as this third exploit happened. And I remember seeing specifically like the architect and a couple others notice transactions that looked a little sketchy. Like basically someone poking the network with a stick saying, hey, this looks like it could be vulnerable to this.
With Ethereum that had come in from like Tornado Cash.
Yes, exactly. That's why it looks suspicious, right? Because those Tornado Cash addresses. And so someone noticed like, hey, this looks sketchy. And in Discord, there was about 2 hours of conversation of like, oh, someone's poking. But, admins were like, and most of the developers were like, well, the chain is halted. What damage can they do? And so the threat of it was not really considered. And I think almost everyone was kind of taken by surprise when this exploit was able to be executed while the chain was halted. And, next episode, we'll talk more kind of the long-term ramifications of stuff like this. But this, was a very good way of, a very good demonstration of being able to like expect the unexpected. And even if you don't think something could go wrong, like it still can. Like the network was halted and no one thought it could be exploited in that situation, but it was. But yeah, so yes, it was halted, and but people were watching, and people actively noticed that it was happening before it actually happened.
Yeah, I remember following Discord as well. It was surreal. Chris, do you have a kind of overview of how is the exploiter able to exploit the system when the state of the network was currently halted?
Yeah, sure. I do know when this is going on. For me, it was just trying to keep up with Discord because there's so much activity. So for me, like I'd wake up and then there's another hack, and it's just like going through and like, oh my God, what's happening? And trying to go through spending hours in Discord, just going through all the comments, understanding what's happening. You don't even know what the status of the chain is. You hear, all the community all coming in and saying, this happened, and we think this should happen. We think that should happen, whatever, which is, I guess, good to lay down those ideas, but it's pretty hard when you're just trying to understand the facts. It's like, what happened? Yeah. So it's pretty interesting. With this one, it was just, again, a bit of a trick on Bifrost specifically. So somebody created their own, you could say a fake router, and then a fake Asgard, so they could do a transaction that looked like they were depositing Ethereum, or other assets as well. And then that would get routed. Inside the actual code, you can pass the vault. Because of churning, the Asgard vault continually changes. So you need to parameterize and pass, the Asgard, you could say, as a parameter. So this attacker passed their vault as the actual Asgard vault, and that's not checked. Well, it wasn't checked at the time. As well as passing actual funds through. And then when those funds were received or sent to the fake Asgard vault, which is really a router, that emitted a deposit event. And emit is basically an event that is seen on chain. You can see that. I don't know if you ever play with Ethereum, you can see that. So then Bifrost can see this and says, oh, well, we've seen that these funds have been deposited to what it thinks is the real Asgard vault, but the memo is invalid. So when you get an invalid memo, it just returns the funds because it doesn't know what to do with those funds when it receives funds with an invalid memo. So it just returned those funds, but not knowing that those funds were in the fake Asgard vault. THORChain uses the real Asgard vault, takes those funds out and sends it. So that's where the issue is, and it's just tricking THORChain to believing it received funds it didn't actually receive, and then returning those funds even though it never got them. So again, it's not really like reaching in and stealing, as in that there's that vulnerability there. It's more just scamming, tricking, or whatever the actual network to cough up funds.
And in this case, funds was, I think, around at the time of the exploit, between $7 and $8 million worth of ERC20s, including, I think, over half of it, 4-point-something million worth of XRune and a handful of others. And those tokens were, transferred, were dumped on SushiSwap. If I remember correctly, they market sold $4-point-something million worth of XRune for a total of $350,000 worth of ETH or something. It was just such a quick market dump, and crashed the price of XRune from, I think it was hovering just under 20 cents to below a penny for a second. And before it, recovered a little bit to, 2, 3, 4, 5 cents. And then today it's back to hovering around like 16 cents. So there's been a recovery there, but, I can just speak from my perspective as all this was happening. I think one of the things that a lot of the community was kind of reeling from is, first off, you have this already down market. And then, so morale is, like, entire sentiment across the entire ecosystem is kind of flat. And then you have these instances of these, a quick series of exploits, which are obviously they're draining funds from the system. The funds are insured by a relatively large, treasury. Last report was, over $100 million in assets. But of course, with the sideways or down market at the time, those assets had kind of shrunk in their value a tiny bit. And then also what's happening here is, as these pools go out of balance, and as these exploits happen, the price of Rune is going down even against the broader market. And so impermanent loss starts to add up, and the impermanent loss protection that THORChain offers on these liquidity pools, that impermanent loss liability is growing as all these exploits are happening, as Rune continues as Rune was going down, and Rune hit like what, 340, 350, if I remember, somewhere around there. And it just, it occurred to me that, at the time, that like a lot of the what makes Rune's economics so powerful, these virtuous positive cycles, as the system gains momentum, and as the liquidity pools grow, and as exchange volume increases, that those same forces actually can create quickly unraveling, downward spirals. And so there was this period of time where, it wasn't, like if God forbid there was another exploit, or if the market continued to go downwards, or, something else, like, THORChain, it was a very tense kind of time for everyone in the ecosystem. And I remember personally being like, wow, like this is like a bare knuckle moment here. And then, I think, I don't want to speak too soon, but like the response and everything around it since then has been just really galvanizing and strengthening. So yeah, it's just a crazy sequence of events and a crazy July. And it'll definitely go in the book when the THORChain book is written in the years to come. Yeah.
So one of the things to keep in mind is that one of the kind of touted, kind of protections economically that THORChain has against, majority node attacks and various types of economic attacks is that by design, the price of Rune would go to zero if someone tries to spend, X amount of dollars to take control of the network to steal the assets within. They would have to spend 3 times more than what exists in the pools, and the price of Rune would drop down to zero because the THORChain network would then be completely compromised and useless. And so in that kind of respect, the fact that Rune did drop like it did is kind of this was a different type of economic attack than something that was kind of predicted. But it's almost by design that the price of Rune did drop as it did. And of course, that was mostly due to just people panic selling. But that's, the incentive pendulum and the kind of 3x, Rune per dollar in the pools is part of the design. And so if someone tries to attack the network to take the Rune within, they come up empty-handed because by design, the price drops.
That's the idea, particularly for node operators, is if you get a bunch of Rune, go in, bond in, try and take the Ugatisite vault, that you're gonna lose way more than what you've actually got.
Yeah, you bond $1 million to protect $500,000.
Yeah.
So why would you steal what's in your vault if you're going to lose twice that much?
That's right. And I think the fact that it didn't actually plummet, like it went down, but it didn't go to 2 cents or something like that. I think that just showed how much confidence people have in the protocol, and you could see by that reaction. Yeah. People like THORChain can't fail. There are issues here. I think the reason why, and I just have to check this, but I think the reason why ERC20s were taken when the network was halted. Reading in the code that Ethereum gets forwarded on the Asgard vault where a lot of the ERC20s are held in the router because you need BFT on Bifrost in order to release those funds. So that's why you could get to it when it's halted. That's what I believe, using the actual event that they used. But yeah, I mean, hacks aside, it's still, from my point of view, it's still there. The community response is good. And it just shows, I think, the resilience of the network. And you just got to understand that also Ethereum's just one part. There's all these other chains in there. So you could just cut Ethereum off and just deal with native ETH, because native ETH is a bit more simpler than dealing with all the ERC20 stuff. And it's fine. Native cross-chain swaps, that in alone is really cool. And then, I think there's a lot of complexity when you add all these ERC20 stuff, because we're trying to bring, Ethereum DeFi into THORChain. And then it's just like, well, is that really the purpose of THORChain to bring Uniswap into THORChain? Like, I don't know. Or should the focus be on, let's connect more chains, let's connect Polkadot, XRM, Zilliqa, all these type of things, BCH, let's connect all of them. And so we can do native cross-chain swaps. So that's probably a good time to refocus and think about it. And it just shows the complexity of it. In my video, I did try and show the complexity of, I'm going to deploy a Uniswap or a SushiSwap versus deploying THORChain, which is just, there's just no comparison in the technological complexity of what you need to do.
And I believe from the latest roadmap, that decision of whether or not to keep or drop ERC20s will be made later on, maybe October or so. So whether or not, THORChain will come back online with ERC20s is, I think, still up in the air. Last I checked.
Yeah, I think it depends on the outcome of the security audits, which is it's really smart. Let's go through all of that, understand what it is, understand what the vulnerabilities are, then do a risk analysis on it and think about is it worth continuing or not.
If I remember correctly, the marching order was Binance Chain first, UTXO chain second, and then Ethereum third, and then open question ERC20.
Right. Yes. And before any of the chains before any of the other chains are going to be online, the THORChain itself, the Cosmos THORChain, will be back online, I think within the next couple of weeks, so that back pay can be made to node operators and liquidity providers. Because at this point, liquidity providers are kind of stuck in their pooling positions, which is not really what anyone wants. But for the sake of security and for the sake of ChaosNet, it's what's needed. But as a a token of appreciation, literally, and as kind of the responsibility of the treasury, that back pay will be done for the whole time the chain has been down, and then block rewards will continue to be paid out until everything's back online, and then they'll continue to be paid out like normal.
I wanted to know, from my point of view, I'm really, in a way, whilst it's not ideal, happy that this happened, because this gives it the shake-up I think it needed. You would be a bit more concerned if THORChain went to mainnet and had no serious issues, because then you're like, well, what are you missing? So the fact that this has happened, the fact that the community's taken over, the fact that, the core team's now given some of the responsibilities, around the bounties and setting the bounty program and stuff like that to the community, I just feel it's a really good step. And, in the bigger term, bigger picture, you kind of like, you're glad it's happened now in ChaosNet with the caps on. This is exactly what was designed to do, as opposed to if this was to happen in mainnet where there are no caps and the TVL is much bigger. So it's just, what's your opinion on that?
I totally agree. That's, the ChaosNet risk assessment from a year ago outlined this exact same thing. Use mainnet assets on a ChaosNet kind of designation with caps to attract hackers. Obviously after 3 exploits kind of back to back, Twitter and the community was very frazzled from it, and a lot of people were making fun of it and saying, "Oh, Rune's toast, the project's done," because most people that were not involved in the community from the very beginning, or really know deep down what THORChain is about, don't understand that this is the point. Like, real assets that the whole THORChain's whole idea is economic incentives. Like, that is everything for THORChain. And that goes down from the design of the network itself with the incentive pendulum to the design of the community, where, community members can build things on top of THORChain and then get paid for them. Like, THORChain is very generous with funding and bounties and community grants and such. Things get built on THORChain because the team knows that incentives work. And so, the fact that, incentivizing these hackers with real assets in order to bait an attack, while unfortunate and millions of dollars were lost, is better now than never. And that's what we kind of wanted to happen. Because if it happens now with a much lower TLV than, a couple of years from now, when there's going to be billions of dollars, the Treasury has the funds to recover from a couple $1 million hack, but not from a multi-billion-dollar hack. So happen now, recover from it, build from it, harden, as a result of that, and instead of being completely wiped out and being DOA.
Yeah, agreed. And the complexity of THORChain was echoed. There was a lot of throughout these exploits, a lot of really key individuals from all over, even outside the THORChain ecosystem, but people like Do Kwon and Larry from Delphi Digital and Eric Voorhees and were voicing their support. And people were saying, there were really respected developers like Do Kwon saying that he believes in THORChain as the future, and also that multi-chain is like the hardest thing. It's hard enough to find developers who are proficient at a single, or developing on top of a single chain, let alone developing your, an entirely new L1 and then, or an entirely new chain and then working on 5 different integrations, working across 5 different integrations is 5 times the surface area. And they all have their own nuances, their own, security kind of like quirks and their own programming languages, and it's very challenging, and that creates this this moat. It's extremely hard tech, and that's why it's extremely valuable, and that's why it's going to be defensible for years to come. And it also occurred to me while all this was happening that it's kind of a rite of passage in crypto. I mean, if you look at Bitcoin, you look at Ethereum, and even I keep on reading about. Like even the precursor to Polkadot. I mean, I forget the name of the project, but they raised like $135 million or something for this other project. And there was some exploit, not even a total exploit where the hacker was able to steal the funds, but like, I think $100 million worth of Ethereum got locked into this contract that couldn't be withdrawn and just taken out of circulation essentially. And it's just, these things, and then, that became, out of that was born Polkadot. Like, these things have a way of happening on these like technical frontiers, and where there is that complexity and where those challenges are is also where innovation happens, and it's where alpha happens. And so, no pressure, no diamonds in a matter of speaking.
Yeah. And as you said, like Do Kwon, Eric Voorhees, and, the Delphi people, came back and doubled down on their backing and investments into THORChain. And so when you see, I don't want to name any names, but, crap like Burger Swap or, Bunny Pickle, whatever finance get hacked, the developers, they vanish. Most of the users vanish, and all that's left are like the Moon Boys, like screaming, when are we going to recover from this? But in the case of THORChain being hacked, not only did the devs, double down, buckle down, and kind of rethink the way that things are going to go forward, the community did as well. The builders within the community and the major back-end investors also doubled down, and that is a massive signal of strength and belief in the team and the network and in the future of the protocol.
Absolutely. And I think that would be a great stopping point to transition into, what will become the next episode. But it occurs to me that we're remiss to I feel like we jumped into this, kind of recap and kind of optimistic forward-looking statements without mentioning that there was just right at the end there, and we call it like the bonus little thing. But this ERC20, this Rune ERC20 kind of like a little last cherry on top that happened like in the hours after the ERC20s were drained, the extra and other ERC20s were drained.
The Steve Jobs, one more thing.
One more thing. Trader, do you want to give a quick overview summary of like what happened there and what transpired?
Yeah, this was a regrettable one because the developers knew that it was going to be a problem. And basically, instead of using the kind of emitted value of what is being transferred within the contract for the THORChain ERC20 contract, it uses like a value 2 amount. So basically, if you approve any contract in your wallet, an attacker can just steal your rune. So you don't, like when you go to Uniswap or Zapper or whatever, and you want to swap a token, you have to approve it. That token specifically. So you want to swap USDC, you have to go to Uniswap and click approve, sign a transaction, wait, and then perform the actual swap. But with this kind of intentional usage of the value 2 method instead of, I can't remember the actual one supposed to use is
it transfer 2?
Transfer 2, right. They use this method instead because they wanted it to be simpler to upgrade Rune, ERC20 Rune to native Rune, and to I'm not sure what the incentive was there, but like to detract exchanges from wanting to use native Rune, or sorry, ERC20 Rune on exchanges, because it's like a transitory token, right? Like ERC20 Rune was created late last year, and I think the primary objective was just more DEX liquidity, particularly with the sushi swap pools. Like sushi swap pools with Rune and Alpha were created to kind of bootstrap some liquidity there. And so this was kind of a known usage of this very, very vulnerable and exploitable function for an ERC20. And it was taken advantage of. The damage, I don't think, was much. It only affected users who unwittingly got an airdrop for the UniH token. And maybe there's other tokens that are taking advantage of this now as well, because as far as I know, the exploit still exists. So if you approve a malicious token, regardless of whether or not you're approving Rune, particularly for transfer, this malicious token can then withdraw all the ERC20 Rune from your wallet. So do not, if you don't recognize a token in your wallet, don't approve it for transfer, because it could potentially steal your Rune.
Or even going a step further, there are people who are recommending, if you have ERC20 Rune in your normal or Ethereum wallet, transfer it to a separate wallet and don't approve any other transactions from that wallet for now until a replacement is shipped. And yeah, luckily it doesn't seem like this has been this has been, there's been a major loss to this. I think, they were like maybe like low six figures. I heard that had been exploited here, but it just, and it occurred to me that if this had happened at any other time, it wouldn't have, it would have been a little footnote. But just because of like the timing of this, it ended up being just one, last kick when the network was already at a low. But yeah, and in the postmortems, there is a path towards reconciling this potential exploit as well. So we have a light at the end of the tunnel on this one as well. Chris, anything else to add?
I guess that's the risk you're going to get when you use Ethereum. It's not specific to THORChain at all. You're going to have risks of people scamming you. It's not specific to crypto either. You got to be vigilant, and it's one of these things where you got to increase your knowledge a little bit to use crypto so you don't fall for these scams. And if it sounds too good to be true, it's probably not. So don't approve stuff you don't know, and if you think you've been affected by this, just transfer your assets to a new wallet, and then discard that old one so you don't have to worry about it. This is probably the simplest thing to do.
Well, Tratium, any other closing thoughts, and then we can wrap up here, and then we'll get ready for tomorrow's episode on community response and going forward.
No, no more thoughts on that. I'm looking forward to tomorrow's episode because it's a lot more uplifting.
Absolutely. Well, with that, on that note, Tratium, Chris, really appreciate you guys coming on. It's been great. First getting to know you guys both, and then running down recap of recent events with you. And we'll leave it on that note for now, and then we'll be back tomorrow. We'll record a second episode where we'll discuss all the things that the community and the core team are doing to really strengthen the project coming out of this. So thank you both.
No worries. Thank you. Yeah, see you next time.
Thank you. See you next time.